everyone, to week 3 of our 12th Soil Nutrition Conference. The reNaturing ourselves is our theme this year. Very excited to have Kay and Amber with us today. We're going to be talking about seed, and for those who've taken my course, you may have heard me talk about the critical importance of seed quality, and you can do all the various things with mineral balancing and minimal disturbance of the soil and inoculation and foliar sprays and all kinds of stuff. But if you don't have high quality seed, you're never gonna realize that full potential of the plant, because it's such a critically important piece of the puzzle. And I've been saying for many years, boy, I'm not aware of anywhere on the market where you can actually purchase really high quality seed. As far as I understand, the way seed companies work is not to optimize the vigor and vitality. They've got different sort of agendas in mind, and people say, can you recommend someone? Can you recommend a company somewhere? And for years and years, I've said no, until just this past winter, when I met Kay and understood what she's been doing with Coanga seed and in New Zealand. So we're hopefully going to have her go into some depth about the process of seed saving and all of her deeper understandings about that. But her daughter, Amber Rose, is going to be leading the conversation today, is directing the questions. And I do hope we also get into this question of seed quality in ourselves and our children, and the quality of the seed that we were from our parents, and what happened with our epigenetics, and as far as the deeper conversation of reNaturing ourselves is concerned, how we can think about the environmental conditions for our children and our grandchildren as part of this deeper conversation. So welcome, Kay and Amber. Would you both mind turning your mics and your cameras on? There's Kay. There's Amber.
Morning.
All right. Good morning. We're calling in from the southern hemisphere. I'm in Perth, Western Australia, where it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and Kay and Amber are in New Zealand, where it's 5 o'clock in the morning. So this is what it's like for people down here who want to attend our conference live and have to be present at a very obnoxious hour of the day. So we're appreciate that fact that as a global community, yeah, what's 1 o'clock in the afternoon for one person is 1 o'clock in the morning for another person. But I think I've said enough. Amber, do you want to just sort of take it away, or you're a chef, you're a writer, you've done all kinds of influencer, I think that's a technical term. You've done a lot in the UK, but you're back now in New Zealand and working with Kay at Coanga. But I think it's beautiful to have a mother-daughter team here as part of this conversation about seed. It seems very apropos to me. But I'm gonna let you lead the conversation. And you've requested that I keep my camera on and engage as well. So even though I'm quite happy to sort of let the presenter take the fore and then engage as an interrogator subsequently, the request here today is that I take part in the being interrogated, I think. So I'll play along.
Brilliant.
Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Dan. Thank you for inviting us to be here. We're very excited. Yeah, I'll just give you a little intro on myself, and then I'll hand it over to Mum. She can give herself a little intro. And then I'll come back and we'll do a little intro for the talk as well. So I'm Amber. Thank you for inviting us here, Dan. This is really amazing, important work to be having the conversation around reNaturing ourselves. I think the word reNaturing is such a brilliant word because it really does sort of sum up. I feel like there's a lot of people now globally, and have been for a long time, but it is definitely getting louder, the concept of regeneration and what does that mean, and nutrient density and all the different things and different spheres. And I feel like the conversations are really starting to join together now, so which is a beautiful thing. And the word reNaturing and what you're doing here on this conference just really pulls it all together. So thank you for having us here. So I'm Amber. I grew up in my mum's gardens. I am a lifelong foodie. I feel like I've done quite a few different things in my time, but always centered around food in one way or another. So um, I feel like I had an education in food, which is probably very unique on the planet, I would say. Not many people grow up inside a living seed bank, which was, as a foodie, probably the biggest gift I could have ever had. I grew up eating food all year round from my mum's gardens and heritage seed gardens. Um, and also just the acts of being brought up in an environment where you're constantly using your hands. Like I remember um, certain times of the year, there'd be a massive glut of basil or tomatoes or whatever it was, fruit. And we'd be, around the kitchen table as children being given jobs for hours on end after school. But, picking basil and it's like, and then you've got your pesto for the rest of the winter. So just tying together those acts of service, I guess, with nourishment and food, and then the pleasure of eating was really ingrained in me from such a young age. So I've gone on to, yeah, write cookbooks, have a big career in food, lived in London for a long time, working as a private chef, and wrote 4 cookbooks, and then came back to New Zealand, where I set up a fermentation business, which I grew from my kitchen table to supplying supermarkets all over New Zealand with these amazing wild fermented products, and really honed in on the concept of food as medicine. And then I exited that business a couple of years ago and have been really supporting mum more with the koanga work and diving deeper into the world of regenerative agriculture. And it's been so beautiful to have different moments of my life really come together now full circle to understand food almost from every angle, I feel like. And in the deeper work in the last couple of years with the regenerative agriculture and regenerative home gardening and seed saving, I feel like it's really come full circle. So yeah, it's just beautiful to be here and looking forward to this conversation today. And I'll hand you over to Mum now.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Dan. Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. And I guess I've always been a gardener since I was a child. The thing that turned me, I mean, I just thought seeds came from the supermarket. I had no idea about saving seeds. I've never heard of saving seeds until the year of the Russian nuclear disaster, Chernobyl. We had friends in Holland who were under a cloud of nuclear fallout at that point, and I knew how bad it was at their place in Holland. And I went to our New Zealand sort of farmers' annual big show thing that they have, and I walked into a seed tent, and somebody said to me, did I realise that the only seeds we could buy in New Zealand that were grown in New Zealand was pukekohe longkeeper onion, and all the rest came from Holland. And I know now that that wasn't totally true at the time, but it was true enough. I didn't know that then, and it certainly served to galvanize me. So from that point on, which is in the early 1980s, I've been really actively, well, actually, they kind of found me in the beginning. They just suddenly started turning up, saving seeds, and I guess the seeds have been my teacher ever since. Probably the most profound point on the journey for me has been the point where I realized that everything in my garden, everything in my orchard, actually I started saving the heritage fruit trees before that, so I already had like hundreds of heritage fruit trees from the area we lived in Northland in New Zealand in my orchard. And then all of a sudden all our vegetables were heritage vegetables, and I started realizing that when I picked a heritage apple or a carrot or a potato or whatever it was, and I mean, even just when I picked it without even eating it, I became conscious that as I picked it, something went through me on a cellular level that meant that that thing nourished me differently to anything I could buy in the supermarket. And what I realized was that the whakapapa, or the story of that apple, totally went through me and became part of me. And so I ended up feeling things that I didn't even have words for, and that it was changing me and growing parts of me I didn't know existed or didn't have words for. And I started realizing that eating this food was bringing alive some kind of cellular memory of who I was, or maybe who my ancestors were. Long before, I mean, my ancestors largely came from England and Northern Europe, and we'd been colonized many times, but before we came out here and my ancestors and colonized this land. And I started to feel as though all those indigenous feelings of connection with my food were somehow being unlocked, and were changed by eating these food grown from these old seeds. So I started to realize there was a lot more to this than what they told me at school, and I just guess I started listening, and they've taken me on this huge journey. So it's been quite a long journey now, 45 years or so, and it's been a journey I could never have planned, and it's been a super exciting journey, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. So just to give a little I feel like we introduce ourselves, but also just to introduce Koanga. So Koanga is the heritage seed bank, the name of the heritage seed bank that Kay set up. Gosh, how many years ago now, Mum? 40,
Well,
45?
I've been doing the work for about 45 years, but it's been officially a registered charitable trust for maybe 25 years.
And it's quite unique in the world, I would say. Koanga holds or is home to thousands of different heritage seeds and food plants. So there's the fruit trees as well as the vegetables, flowers, herbs, and things. And just to give some level of scale, there's like 150 different varieties of tomatoes alone in the Koanga seed bank, which is absolutely amazing. And I think like when we dive into the world of seeds, one of the things that's very unique about Koanga is how everything is done regeneratively. So it's not just your average seed bank. So not only does it hold an incredible, globally significant collection of heritage seeds, but it's all done regeneratively and locally. And the seeds have had multiple generations and years now to adapt to the local climates and soils. And yeah, so Koanga is very special, very unique, globally significant place which holds or stewards seeds from all around the world. So
Yeah,
it's pretty.
because our ancestors came from all around the world, so they brought their taonga, their sacred plants with them, and so we actually hold really important seeds that have come from other parts of, many of them have come from other parts of the world, but most of them have been, almost all the seeds in our collection now have been here for between 100 and 200 years. And yeah, so, and it's, as Amber said, it's not just about the genetics, it's also about environment, which I learned that from my early years with Acres USA magazine. I think there was a man called John Franks, who was one of the early biological agriculture consultants. I think he's still around, who wrote some instructions in Acres USA many years ago, telling us what we had to do to our seed if we wanted to be building nutrient dense, high quality seeds. And I've just done that every year ever since. So we've now got 20 years of building the strength and the vibration of the seeds of this land.
Well, you told me that it was when Arden Anderson came down and taught some
Well, he
courses.
was part of me learning. I mean, there are Graham Sate, Arden Anderson. Arden Anderson's been and done a lot of workshops in this land, and I went
Yeah.
to several of them, but I don't have a science degree, and I find it really hard to understand a lot of the science. So I'm a kind of beginner at science. My strength is more intuitive and, in my body rather than in my head. So But Arden Anderson was certainly a major influencer in my early thinking around this. But he
If I
never
can,
ever gave instructions for how to grow. Well, I guess he was giving it. He was teaching people how to grow nutrient-dense food, but I never related that to the seed. It was really John Frank that related it very strongly to seed in Acres USA.
he was one of the first people I ever gave a course with was John Frank. I remember, yeah, out in Indiana, I think. But there's a really important point here about not just saving the seed, but the health of the mother plant. And I think
Yeah,
when we had the conversation a few months ago, you were talking about how you had been, a very diligent organic farmer, gardener with your composting and stuff, and over 20 years had taken soil and improved its function. But then I think you said one of your people who was working with you on the land had taken a course with Arden, and you gave him some
yeah.
tight clay soil, and in 1 year his crops were better
Well,
than
in
yours or
4 months,
something.
he was growing. I mean, I had a 30-year-old incredible organic garden that looked amazing, and he wanted another piece of land, so which we had, so because he thought he could do better, and he showed me, after having done Arden's course, he showed me that in 4 months his bricks was way higher than mine. So then I learned from him.
And the implications of that for the health of the next generation of the seeds, I think is part of what I want to be getting into here. Do you want to speak
Yeah,
to
and
that?
so in terms of the seeds, it's been a combination of one, learning how to build the soil and grow high bricks plants, which means higher brick seeds, but it's also the processing process. So you bring the seeds into the seed shed and we thresh them, and then we grade them by weight, by size, and it's all done by hand here. Everything's done by hand. It's all graded by size by screen and then by weight. So that's the critical thing. For the mother seed, every year has to be the largest, heaviest seed from the seed crop. So it's really only by doing that, as well as working with the soil, obviously the soil is critical, that you continually improve the quality of the seeds. And the most profound probably thing that ever happened to me was in the very first year I started doing it, when I bought what I considered to be the best seed in New Zealand, some biodynamic grain seed, rye seed, and I grew it out. And when following these principles of biological agriculture, and when I harvested it, the seed was twice as heavy as the seed I'd originally planted. So only in 1 year you could visually see the difference.
Yeah, this has been my experience as a farmer, and what I try to keep talking about during my courses. It's so easily done. It's so easily done, and the critical import of rematriating that seed to the land you're from and having the mother plants be healthy has such powerful impacts in the next generation of your plants. Um, Really, really important stuff. But Amber, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. I think you're the one who's
Oh, all
supposed to
good. So
direct
good,
anything.
so good. Yeah, I think the conversation around seeds is something within the world of specifically regenerative agriculture. The seeds are kind of the elephant in the room. And I think that the seeds hold so much more. They're not just a key to being a connection, like there's not just a connection between the microbiome of the seed, the soil, the gut, and back again. But it's the culture also. I think that to restore our culture, the seeds need to be, or absolutely must be, a part of the conversation. So where we sort of wanted to start the conversation today was just figuring out where we're actually at and with the seeds. So I've got a little thing here. We're sort of going to break up today's conversation into three parts. And the initial part was just to start around where we're at, the disconnection, essentially. So I'll just read this out and then we're going to go into some questions. When we lose the seeds, we lose entire food cultures. A language can be lost in a generation. So too can a kitchen, a garden, a way of being. When we lose the seeds, or the garden, or the kitchen, the culture that goes and the culture that goes with them, we lose the stories. And stories are one of the threads that connect us all. When that connection is broken, we begin to lose our health, our resilience, and our sense of belonging. The degeneration isn't just in our soils and food systems, it shows up in our bodies and even in the health of our children. Disconnection from living seed, nutrient-dense food, and the land impacts our biology across generations, influencing whether we evolve toward vitality or devolve toward fragility. So that's really where we're at right now. We're at a critical point. Like there's an epidemic of health crisis, soil loss of biodiversity in the soils. It's a critical moment in time, I think. And to be able to start having these conversations and weave the threads back together for people on all the levels is so, so important. So I'd love to ask you both. The first question is, what's been lost in our modern food systems and how did we get here?
Well, my understanding of what's been lost is that we lost when we plant a seed in a living soil, the plant roots connect with the microbes and the life in the soil and are communicating with the life in the soil and via the photosynthesis process, the life in the universe, and that all those messages combine in a plant and enter our bodies when we eat the food from that plant and communicate with us and affects our vibration and who we are, and then we in turn affect the environment around us in many ways. And so when we lose the living soil, which is what we've done in our industrial food systems, we actually, and also, well, I'll come there in a minute, we don't have the communication entering our bodies anymore from the earth where we live and from the universe where we live, which has always traditionally been how we are connected to the natural world. It's like the web of life. We've been connected to the web of life. And so when we grow our food differently, we're not connected anymore to the web of life, which is, it's those connections that made us all who we are and why we're different around the world. But the other thing there is when we save our own seeds in our own gardens and in our own soil, and those seeds and plants recognize the soil, recognize this place in the universe, and our bodies also via epigenetics recognize those food plants. So we are really intimately in the past have always been totally connected to place by our seeds. It's simplistic to say the seeds, but because it's the communication between the seeds and the life in the soil and the universe, which is connecting everything up. So not only does it need to nourish us fully and to our full potential, I believe, and for us to reach as humans, our full potential, we require, and we've co-evolved always in the past until relatively recently times, with seeds that have co-evolved in that environment with us and in a living substrate and a living soil, which facilitated communication. So we lost both of those things. We lost the living soil and we lost our own seeds when we stopped gardening after Second World War in New Zealand.
Yeah, I think there's some really, really powerful things there to unpack, or I mean, maybe people understand what you said. I think in the last presentation last week, Mark Cohen was talking about exosomes, and that's a fancy word for all these little compounds that are in the air, in the food, that are all, communicating literally from this place. And, we actually have the science now to understand or to talk about um, where things come from. And it's something about that being grounded in yourself and being centered in yourself and being in that place of, when you have your center, then, you can you can be centered and engage the world around you in a coherent fashion. But when you're building your form from things from all over, um, that are not harmonious with each other, are not harmonious even to begin with, it's not so much about the vitamin B12 and the cobalt and the molybdenum and the polyphenols and the antioxidants. There's something about the place. I think this is one of the
Yeah.
things that the local movement, one of the insights of the local movement, we can look at the permaculture community, and they've got some powerful insights, and the biodynamic community, obviously. And, we can look at all these different sort of streams of thought in the food movement. But there is something really powerful about that local movement. And I think when I have the privilege of talking to people from indigenous communities, I had a wonderful conversation with a guy here, an Aboriginal man from Australia, a couple nights ago. And he was just, again, sharing that deeper connection to place and to land and to song and to culture. There is a really powerful aspect of being centered in yourself that comes from that full cycle of you know the moon and the stars and the climate and the weather and the season and the food and the seasonality, and all of that coming ideally from land that's vibrant and vital. And we can talk about the level of organic matter and how that and the mycelial hyphae and how those function like a and like a vibrating web, it's in the soil. And when the energy from the stars comes down, is it able to be held in the land by the vibration of that web of the life in the soil, or is it just passed through unengaged because you don't have soil structure? Um, we can actually explain the Western scientific, you know, form, like how and why these things that indigenous traditional cultures have, implicitly understood work. Um, but it does seem that, the more you get away from that, the less centered and grounded you become, and the less able to manifest your full potential you have. I think, I mean, yeah, if I may, Amber, it was just one of the points that Kay has said a couple of times was the seeds speak to me, or I'm not quite sure how she said it, but it was like they're your teachers, and you experience viscerally. And I think what you've been doing for decades now, I mean, you're not quote unquote indigenous to, I'm not even sure how you guys say New Zealand. There's a word for it that I don't have.
Aotearoa.
Aotearoa. I mean, obviously you're not genetically from there for thousands of years, but it does seem like, the act of living a life there and growing the food there and eating the food from the land there has brought about in you this deeper awareness, this psychic, I would perhaps presume to say, connection, um, that is part of what it means to be fully embodied, which is something beyond what I think a lot of people have any actual experience with. Maybe now is not the time, but I would love it if you could, if you wanted to attempt to convey what that's like to be in that state of connection with the land and that cycle. Not now if you don't want
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
but I
my
think it's
family's
really
been here for
important.
7 generations. Well, I kind of have been feeling for for a number of years now that it's been a really strange journey, because I feel like I've grown up with the English language is the language of my people, and I feel like most people from England that came to New Zealand, well, probably everyone in England now, we were colonized so many times so long ago that a lot of these concepts aren't in our language anymore. The concepts, like I can talk about these things with Māori people, and even if they don't live like this, the concepts and the words are right there. They totally understand what we're talking about. But I didn't have the words and the concepts in me to begin with at all. So I've had to like build my confidence and begin by talking with people who could understand me, who did have it in their language, like Te Ao Māori it's right there. So it has been an interesting thing, but for me, it just feels like connection. Like we've become so disconnected, we don't really know who we are or where to go, and we get this depression and mental health issues. And for me, all of that is just about disconnection. Like when you're reconnected in so many different ways, because you're of the earth and you're working on the earth and all that goes with that, the life, you just feel supported, and it's easy then to be a witness or be who you really are and be grounded with it. I just think it makes for a completely different kind of human. So to me, it's all what you're calling it. We've been calling it regeneration for a long time, but reconnection, and you're calling it rewilding. Is that what you were?
Renaturing.
Renaturing, yeah. Renaturing is becoming a common word, a common phrase. And I just think it's a very subtle, like, it doesn't need to be a huge thing. It's just little step by step. I mean, understanding via the new science of epigenetics that, there's a part of our DNA, there's a part of the junk DNA, the part of our DNA that recognizes our food or that communicates with our food is more fully nourished and more, that the food of our own ancestors is recognized by our DNA and more fully nourishes us than anyone else's food. And I mean, there's a big challenge in that. It's great to know that, but if you happen to be like me and most of us, we're living somewhere else now. So what do we do about it? Well, reconnect where we are, grow the food that we can grow where we live, that we like, that we connected with from our past, maybe. Sometimes we can't because the climate's so different. But if you do this for year after year, eventually you build the intercellular connections, the neural pathways. You just rebuild the neural pathways that help us reach our potential and make us somehow different people. So I don't think that's an instant thing. I mean, I felt when I first started saving seeds in New Zealand, I realized we had a few gaps and a few weaknesses in the collection where things had been really hard to save, and we'd obviously lost a lot. And so I imported some seeds from the best places I could find in the world. And so that food became the food for my family, for my children as well. And I felt as though it took around about until their children were also eating the same food for it to become part of and felt like it was really part of us and part of who we were, and that we were fully able to read it. I didn't feel like in the beginning my body was able to read the vibration of, say, amaranth and quinoa and American Indian flower corn, all of which I introduced into our diets when my children were really young. We grew all of our grains. But it was only many years later that I started realizing that, feels like a disconnect there, but over time it becomes part of us and part of who we are, and the stories become our stories. It takes time. But yeah, I think that building ourselves back into the web of life, renaturing, is something that's very subtle and very gentle and very powerful and has a huge impact on who we are and the whole environment and the whole ecosystem around us.
I spent a week in Colombia last year and was very fortunate to spend some time with the indigenous people of that particular area, they're known as the Kogi, which I'd known about from the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was a younger person. And there was a documentary that came out called Aluna, which you can still look up. It's on YouTube. So Kay told me about them. I remember being a young girl, and Kay was like, made us watch this documentary, and it stuck in my brain ever since. And so I saw this opportunity to be able to go and spend some time with them, and I just jumped at it. And a lot of the conversations during that week were all about food, and why food is so important. And they said one thing which just sums it up. They said, the food holds the codes of the territory.
Yeah.
And so when you understand the connection between the seeds, the soil, the food, ourselves, how we then express that outwards again, and you're in a place with a living system, and you are receiving those codes, you're then able to express those codes and you form this like living net. That's exactly what Kay just summed up, the living network of that natural process. And I just thought that was a beautiful way of putting it. The food holds the codes of the territory, but what starts with the food is the seeds. So I think, within our modern system, everything's become so disconnected. You've got industrial seeds which don't have a great microbiome being flown all around the world, put into various different industrial systems that they're not connected to, also in soil that doesn't have a lot of fertility in it. And then that food's shipped halfway around the world to some supermarket. It's crazy when you realize the system that we are currently living with that is disconnected. And once you start to dive into that conversation of, how important the seeds, the soil, the codes of the territory, being in a place and connected to that place, and the living expression of that, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to slowly understand that over time and realize the importance of it.
And hopefully begin to, bring your life more in harmony with those deeper cycles. I think that's part of what I'm hoping to inspire, if people already didn't feel sufficiently inspired, is,
Yeah.
the actual visceral import of that for
Yeah.
well-being of yourself and your family.
Yeah, we've
Um,
totally normalized ill health. We think that who we are is way below what our potential is. And I think as humans, we have insane potential that we're not realizing because we're so disconnected from the web of life. We've got these very few strands left that are holding us connected. And it's like we're just not plugged in anymore. Plug ourselves in and we can achieve a lot more.
We've only got 2% of our energy running through our circuitry. We're not really not able to manifest much, right? Like if you have a desire to be more, then you have to
Plug
plug
in.
back into the cycles of life. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think as well, one of the other things which always gets left out of the conversation is just it's so simple, but so as we spoke about in the previous conversation with you, Dan, how the soil grows nutrient density and flavor. And I feel like flavor is not something that is really talked about, but our mouth is a technology. And when you're able to eat food from a place, know the hands that grew it, it tastes incredible because it's nutrient dense. You get a heightened level of pleasure, enjoyment, satisfaction. You begin to form this like emotional connection because it's so delicious and it pierces your kind of, you're not just eating in a mundane kind of industrial way. You've got this level of like eating and enjoyment, which creates this amazing feedback loop. And so then it kind of creates a desire, which then sparks off
Yeah.
a whole other level of things. And it just goes in on a much deeper level. Like I remember coming home from school and going out into the garden in summertime. Well, first of all, I always knew which fruit trees were in season, and I would be the first one various fruit trees, much to Mum's horror, because I was always getting in trouble for eating the fruit before anyone else could get it. But I remember, for example, being in the like in the vegetable, the home garden, not the seed gardens, but it was the same for them. And I would come home from school and I would go and get a snack. And I remember like picking a sun-ripened cherry tomato and wrapping it in a Genovese basil leaf and just popping it, like eating it. And like, I will never forget that. Like, it is pierced into the consciousness of my being. The flavor of that cherry tomato, warm from the sun, like the basil, the fret, like, oh, you just like, you do not get that level of intensity and flavor from a supermarket cherry tomato and basil leaf. I've never had a supermarket cherry tomato and basil leaf pierce my consciousness. Do you know what I mean? Like it just they go in on a different level.
I'm
Which
surprised it's not the memory of the peaches that you hold
oh
the ripe peaches from straight from the tree.
just everything. Like I think flavor is such an important conversation in the technology of the mouth and how that feeds into all of our different systems. Like it's a powerful thing. Um, which you get when you grow nutrient dense food. The flavor is so much more uh, stronger, which creates stronger neural pathways and emotional connections to the food that you're eating.
I like to say that, we're actually wired, like you're saying, with these really sophisticated perception capacities in this thing we carry around, we call our body, right? It's not about the external instrumentation. It's not about the microscopes or the telescopes or the refractometers or anything else. The actual truth of what's right and what's not is in, like, we're wired with it.
Yeah.
And like when you have that experience of intense pleasure, that means good. And when you have something that is not that, that means not good. When you have, an experience with a person that's leaves you feeling, dissonant or troubled or hurt or something, that's not good. Like when you're with a person and you feel inspired and you feel energized, that's the truth, right? We actually are wired with these things. The answers are within. They are within, and that's, it's just we've been taught to trust the things that are outside of ourselves and not to actually understand that really we have everything we need inside this thing we carry around every day. It's so
Yeah, I've had to
powerful.
acknowledge that our body gets confused when you have sugar addictions and things like that. Like sugar addiction makes it quite difficult to connect to the good food and be, like that's been a struggle of mine. Like we do hold all that potential, but you've got to, eat well to be able to feel it.
The
Yeah.
ultra processed food people know what they're doing. They work off the same principles that nature has, but they do it with ultra processed
Yeah.
flavors, sweetness, salt, fat, like all the things that create deep satisfaction in an ancestral way with proper real food. They create it synthetically. They know exactly what they're doing.
But it doesn't leave you feeling fulfilled.
No, and
You actually look
get on this
within.
cycle of you're never
Yeah.
satiated.
You can get that high from that intense pseudo flavor, but it doesn't actually leave you deeply fulfilled. And that's the thing we need to all really attend to, is that our inner experience, and that let that guide us, because that's where the answers are. I'm thoroughly convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that leads us into the second part of our talk, which is seed as living culture. Um, Heritage seeds are more than genetics. They are a living expression of land, people, and memory. They shape us and we shape them. This is co-evolution in practice. People and plants influencing each other over time, with the way we grow them directly affecting the nutrient density that nourishes our bodies and the genetic health of future generations. At Kuanga, we don't just grow seeds, we grow a living lineage of health and culture from the soil up. The way we tend our seeds is just as important as the seeds themselves. Our methods, regenerative, relational, and deeply rooted in place, are designed not only to preserve biodiversity, but to pass on vitality, flavor, and resilience to the people who grow and eat them. So I think that's just like so important to acknowledge the depth of that connection between seed, soil, place, and the nourishment that you get from that, because the seeds are often the elephant in the room within the regenerative conversation. They're so hard to get. I mean, it's to buy large quantities of heritage place adapted seeds for big scale growing is almost impossible. I don't,
Impossible.
yeah, I don't even
Impossible.
know if it can be bought. I'm not even sure. I don't
I don't
know of
think
any.
so. No.
No. So the first question I've got on here around this area is what would be great for the listeners to understand is like the different levels of what is an industrial seed, what is a nutrient dense seed, and how I think there's one really important piece which I've always felt very interesting to learn is how an F1 hybrid seed can't communicate properly with the life in the soil, and that's the initial disconnect in this system. So would you like to talk us through that, Kay?
Well, I think essentially we've got two main growing systems in the world. One is the industrial system and one is a living system. And essentially what's happening at the moment when in all the industrial systems is that we have soil is just being used to hold the plants up. It just holds the roots there in place, and we're mainlining the plants, and we're not engaging the age-old process of coevolution and the microbes and the life in the soil, and there's no communication between the soil. Well, I guess probably shouldn't say none, but it's very low levels of communication happening with the soil and with the universe. So the plants, those plants are not going to fully nourish us. There's no way they can. And the methods we have been using for breeding new cultivars, we're specifically breeding them in the industrial world to grow in those kind of systems. So in the age-old biological system, I think we've covered it a little bit, is, it's about building connection in many ways between the seeds, the microbes, the water, the energies in the bedrock, the minerals in the soil, and the life in the universe. So it's about reconnection. So that's the main two differences. And the ability of a seed to grow food that nourishes us is completely dependent on which system it came from, as well as where the seed came from. So what was the main, where does that lead?
Yeah, like what is the what is an industrial seed and what is a regenerative seed? Like how do they differ?
Well,
Like if
one of
if
them,
you
it's
plant an
pretty
industrial
simple.
seed in a biological system, what's the implications of that? I think
Yeah,
people who are farming really don't understand. There's so many organic farmers who primarily, small or organic CSA farmers market farmers who are planting 90% F1 hybrids.
yeah,
And
that
they
almost
understand.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really amazing new farmers out there, small scale farmers, but they're using all industrial seed because they get more profit from it. Um,
it's
but
not just that though, like the regenerative seed, you can't even buy it on a large scale, I don't think. I've never seen it anywhere.
yeah, you can't. Not that I know of either. So, I mean, there's a huge gap there. I think there is an organization in America, the Organic OECSI, they're really taking steps towards, I'm really keen to get more involved with that group. I haven't had the time, but I need to. I think there are some signs in America of some really positive things happening over there. But I need to learn more about that. I mean, we're doing our best because we do everything by hand. We're only growing small amounts, and we're really only supplying home gardeners and small organic producers. But there's certainly a huge gap all around the world. But, I mean, there's a huge difference, and that's the next step that we have to find solutions to.
I think another really important thing that I found very interesting to learn is with the big movement globally going back to local food systems, there's certain sections of seeds, specifically grains, where the industrial system, they've had seeds specifically bred to suit being harvested by large scale machinery. And this is where someone like the organization like Koanga, for example, holds this incredible collection of globally significant heritage grains, which are the kinds of grains that ancestral and indigenous farmers grew that fit within their system. You don't need industrial machinery to harvest them, process them. So it's not even just about the nutrient density and the health and flavor. It's also about the practicality of maintaining access and why it's so important to steward some of these seeds because they are the seeds that fit within local food systems. That's also
Yeah.
another just very
Yeah,
practical point.
it's very obvious with grains where the grains have actually been bred to not easily come out of their husk so that they don't shatter when they're being harvested. So then it's really hard to get them out without machinery. But it's the same with vegetables too. Like the way to make the most money from a vegetable is to only have to harvest it once. Whereas we as Indigenous people always chose vegetables that we could keep picking and harvesting over a long period of time because that's what suited us in the kitchen. You want something every night. You don't just want beans that you're going to harvest in one day. What's the use of that? It doesn't work. So yeah, the whole breeding program has changed it to fit an industrial culture where we don't have our own food, we don't grow our own food. It's all grown for us by big machinery, and it's grown for a different reason than nourishing people. It's grown to put money in the pockets of the shareholders of those companies, basically. So whatever makes the most money. And we know that there's an inevitable inverse relationship between production and nutrition. In all of our food plants, there's an inevitable inverse relationship between production and nutrition. So there's a book called Seeds of Change by Kenny Ausubel, who's a pretty well-known American writer in this area. He's part of the team that formed the Bionutrient conferences. Yeah, that's worthwhile understanding, like inevitable inverse relationship between production and nutrition.
I'm not, I might push back on that one.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, well, I mean, it's depending on what your assumptions are. I mean, I know you were talking about it, but let's just unpack for a second. When you say plants have been bred to be picked once, do you understand that when you buy green beans at the grocery store or, frozen in a package in the grocery store, that they were planted, they were grown, a machine came once, ripped them up, pulled the beans off of them, threw the dead plants down, and then put them through the machinery? Like people who've raised green beans would never think that only once do they rip the plant out of the ground, pull the beans off, and throw the plant on the ground, right? That's not how you grow beans, but that's how green beans are grown in the industrial system. So if you think about that, the way we grow beans, like there's a few that are ripe, you pick them, and there's more flowering, and they come through, and the next week there's more that come in, and then they keep flowering, and there's more that come in. And I've got zucchini and yellow squash in my garden, and here it is September. That's fall for us in the Northern Hemisphere. And I planted it in the spring, and it's still coming on with great squashes, beautiful, beautiful squashes, 3-4 months later. And so, I mean, how do you define production? I would say if you've got a healthy plant that is, big leaves, green leaves, making sugar, injecting it into the soil, feeding the soil life, the more that system cycles, the more, the higher the Brix reading, the better the levels of life in the soil, the more energy going up into the plant, the more nutrients. I don't think you have to have a negative relationship there between nutrition and yield. I think it has a lot to do with the health of the plants. That's what got me into this whole thing in the first place 17, 20 years ago, was as a farmer finding that my cost of production went down as my soil health improved. And, I was growing salad greens professionally, and I would plant my lettuce for mesclun mix once in the fall, and I'd be literally picking that same patch 6-8 months later, my 10th or 12th cutting off of one planting, because I had healthy plants and they were able to just keep cycling and cycling and cycling. So yeah, it's a dangerous, I mean, some of these one-liners are dangerous. If you're presuming a chemistry set system, then I can say, yeah, sure, maybe there's a difference between like putting lots of fertilizer in and getting lots of volume but has low levels of nutrients. But I don't
I
think
think he's talking about it more at the level of if you breed a seed for generation after generation to produce more and more and more production, then, and that's the only genetic trait that you're breeding for, that there's in the seeds, in the genetics, there's actually a connection, an inverse, inevitable connection between breeding for production and the seed containing the ability to be nourishing. Anyway,
but
it's
those
not my
but
field of expertise particularly, so
I think when they've been breeding for production, they've also been breeding for the plant's ability to take in soluble fertilizer. And when you jack up the fertilizer, you get large amounts of empty yield. But that's like saying, sure, you can take human growth hormone or steroids and get big muscles. But that's not, you can also eat well and use your body on a regular basis and have big muscles and be strong. So I think it's almost like a different vector to get to that yield point. Anyway, but there are, yes, so many intertwined topics here. I would argue as a farmer that we don't need to be necessarily losing yield, while still being able to um, optimize nutrition if we work well with the biological system. And that's the piece that's oftentimes misunderstood when people who are more book smart talk about this kind of stuff. But that can be also a point of we don't necessarily need to agree on. Um, uh, what do you think, Amber?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I feel like there are some things that are bred within their industrial system for solar, the harvesting once, but then there's also on the flip side of that, there's certain things like the tomatoes, for example, that are all grown in polytunnels and they're bred to be able to grow for 2 years and just pick continuously. But it's kind of the same problem. They're bred for, uniformity, extended picking time, but there's the flavors just flavor and nutrition is
Shelf
non-existent.
life,
Yeah.
about shelf life.
So it's yeah, they're breeding within the industrial model. There's a breeding to fit within the system of uniformity, shelf life. It's not flavor, it's not nutrition. It's not the same things that a plant would naturally express as it evolves to place. And if you're saving the strongest mother seed from each season and it naturally co-evolves, it's going against the natural evolution that a plant would naturally take.
And I would argue it's not natural for us to be living in, tall boxes away from land. And so, we have a system which is engineered to support us being denatured, removed from nature. And, there's a whole bunch of things that have been engineered to support that outcome, which I think, in my mind, all need to be questioned and considered whether they're viable pathways going forward in the first place. And maybe this is an opportunity to bring up the topic of children, and early childhood development. This is a particular passion of mine. As I understand the science, what the child experiences in their first, months and years of life powerfully impacts who they are for the rest of their life. And if you bring up a child in front of screens in a box, we call them houses, but I mean, a cell, it's a series of right-angled rooms, and they don't have their formative influences being the forms and structures and beings of nature. Then that level of ability to communicate and engage holistically and meaningfully with nature is not there, right? And then if that happens, if they have children, if you do that for a couple of generations, you get to a point where a lot like a hybrid seed, you don't know how to engage with the microbiome. You don't know how to engage with nature. You can't grow in natural soil. You really need to be subsidized, supplemented with synthetic materials to be able to function and exist. And I see this, it looks like an impending crisis, if we look down 20, 40, 50 years into the future of humanity and our ability to reproduce and our function as whole beings. And to my mind, that has a lot to do with the formative influences that our children experience and what they normalize. And
Yeah.
yeah, sure, it's possible to live in a city and have food brought to you from around the world and to be able to maintain your system, basic function. But if you play that out over a couple generations, it doesn't look like it's a plausible scenario for success. So
No, it's just continuing the disconnection, and the more disconnection we have, the weaker everything becomes. We become weaker. I mean, we've totally normalized really bad health. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious, really. We have all the science to show that the average life of a human being is getting less and less, faster and faster, and we're on the fast track to extinction. I mean, the way to recover the whole thing is to renature and rebuild the connections. I mean, there's, I don't know about around the world at the moment, but in New Zealand, there's a horrendous mental health, like there's a whole generation now of, well, maybe more than one, of really serious mental health issues, which affects people's ability to function normally in the world at all. And there's a lot of research. There's a woman, amazing woman in Tasmania in Australia, who has put together the research to show there's strong connections between mental health and just good food. And it's just about rebuilding connections. It's obvious, it's everywhere. All the work's been done, but making changes is not easy for people somehow. So I guess inspiring people feels better than telling people they have to change.
I
Well,
heard
if you
this
were a
beautiful.
hybrid seed, what would you do? If you were, I mean, if you were a hybrid seed, functionally you had been denatured, you had been removed from a, indigenous culture community, you had been crossbred and removed from nature. Like, imagine that we functionally, a lot of us are living as though, you know, at birth, we are hybrid seeds to begin with. What's the process of renaturing from a hybrid seed, right? You can do it. You plant that hybrid seed in living soil, and it may not have a great core microbiome, but it can begin to grow, and then its seeds can be saved, right? There's a process of doing that, right?
Yeah, just you have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and selecting and doing it and selecting and just finding ways to reconnect. And I guess people can do it just the same as seeds can do it. It's a journey.
To me, that's the deeper conversation up at this conference is we have to realize where we sit in our lives now in this continuum and be honest about it and say, okay, what's the path forward? Um, yeah. Sorry,
I think as well, what's really a beautiful thing to remember is how adaptable we are. Like human beings are so resilient and so adaptable, and the place that we now find ourselves on the precipice of global issues with mental health and physical health, it hasn't happened overnight. It's taken multiple generations of degeneration, living
Yeah.
within a disconnected system. But the same goes for the opposite. There's a process of reconnection and a process of building resilience and strength. We are so adaptable as human beings.
yeah.
But I guess it's kind of, yeah, it's like how do you spark the the idea with people to begin that process? Because when you haven't had something that like a delicious cherry tomato and a basil leaf that pierces your consciousness of pleasure and taste and this wonderful thing of what's possible, how do you even know what you're going for? It's kind of like you're working blind. You don't even know. But I heard this beautiful piece of, I think it was Rowan White recently. I saw a little clip of her talking at a conference, and she said that things like berries and flowers are the gateway, or I had a joke to myself that it was like the gateway drug. Berries and flowers are the gateway drug, because she said what we need to do is like within these national parks and wild spaces to plant berries and flowers rather than kind of beating people around the head or saying all these things that are wrong. Let's give people the tools of connection and what it's pleasure. It's like when you pick a flower, you get so much enjoyment and pleasure from that. You want to then protect that space. You want to then have more flowers, and the same with berries. It's like, what are the things that spark that initial connection? And it's really to do with pleasure and emotional connection. And you then begin this process of it becomes an emotional thing then because you're enjoying it, rather than it's all sciencey and you kind of don't really
Yeah.
understand it and it's not your forte. I don't know. I think that was a really beautiful
Yeah,
insight
really
from her.
interesting that she said flowers. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed is I've spent a lot of time traveling around the old house sites of the people of the early European settlers all around the Kaipara Harbour and all over Northland. And the last things that survive in those gardens are the flowers that came from the homeland. And there's an amazing book called Generations, I don't know who wrote it, which says that when we leave our homeland and we travel around the world, and when we get old and we can no longer garden or can grow all our food, the last thing we stop gardening is flowers, because it's like opens the windows to the soul and the memories, and it's a really strong link to our past and to our mothers and our grandmothers and our homeland. And so yeah, that's an interesting thing to put flowers in there. Berries, it's an obvious one with berries that burst, but flowers do hold.
Well, they just spark so much joy. It's,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do you,
I
because
think
when
more than
someone
that
doesn't
too.
even know what it is they're missing, how do you spark joy that wants to then have a desire to reconnect? Like you give someone a bunch of flowers and it's just this immediate wow, It's it's when you think about it, it's so obvious, right?
I've never
Yeah.
had the experience myself, but I I know it's true for others. I completely missed that one entirely. I've always
And,
quite
and then
questioned
regenerative
what.
And then regenerative growing systems, vegetables and fruits were never separate from flowers. Flowers were always part of it. Like in the gardens that I remember in Mum's gardens growing up, there were so many flowers with the companion planting, the peach blossom before the fruit. Like I knew the look of all the different flowers, even like or when things go to seed, because certain things have flowers after the
Yeah,
vegetables. So you've got like I will often leave things to go to flower in my garden specifically because I like to pick the flowers, not even just the vegetables. Like I love to be able to decorate my salads, my various different things with the flowers of like radishes, coriander flowers, basil flowers. Like there's so many flowers that I love to use in my cooking as so even I'll grow things for the full life cycle, not just for the vegetable.
Yeah.
yeah,
And the other thing that I've only seen or experienced since we've been here, we've been on the land we're on now for 15 years. And when we came, it was a sheep paddock with no trees pretty much. And we've been planting things that flower, trees, like loads of fruit trees and forest gardens, building forest gardens. And it's the flowers that build the ecosystem, because after, after about 3 years of planting, and flowers all over. I mean, right now it's like far out. It's spring here, and there's just blossom everywhere. And the flowers bring the insects, and the insects bring the birds. So
yeah,
we've actually watched that happen. So
yeah.
flowers they build life, and that's something that affects us a lot. I mean, yeah, it's a really strong part of the web of life.
And the bird
Flowers.
song. And the bird
Mm,
song is so viscerally pleasurable. And actually, many flowers are deeply aromatic, and that is viscerally pleasurable. So, we're talking about the tongue and flavor, but also there's the nose and aroma, and then there's the ears and the bird song and all these things. I mean, it's so amazing in the morning, if you're in an area where there's diversity, to hear all the birds singing, right? Or
it's
I
happening
mean,
right outside my window right now.
it's a cacophony. It's a cacophony, and it's so
I
yeah,
think like what going back to the adaptability thing, the reason we're so adaptable and resilient is because of our senses. Like we are designed to sense things visually, scent, flavor, textural, colors. And when you're in this like beautiful regenerative system of gardens and growing, there's so much that you can sense on all the different levels. And
Mm,
it's those things that kind of help connect up all the neural pathways, I think. And just
yeah.
thinking about like that is how we're so adaptable is because we can sense on all those different levels. And an
Have
industrial
those feedback
system,
loops. Yeah,
yeah, within the industrial system, there's less to sense. There's less flavor, less taste, less scent, less biodiversity. There's less of everything.
yeah, and you know how I think you mentioned just before that, and so one of so we've got these like physical health issues and mental health issues, but I think um our spiritual health as well is deeply connected to having a healthy live ecosystem, which is inspiring and joyful, and the flowers are a really important part of that. The whole ecosystem health also leads to spiritual connection and a strong sense of who we are, a place to stand, gives us a place to stand.
Yeah. All right, this is a wonderfully expanding conversation.
Where are we, Amber?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we've got a little bit of time left. The Garden of Eden, exactly. That was someone just left a comment. The Garden of Eden, absolutely. So would be cool to. I'm just thinking there are a couple more questions on part 3, the return. Yeah, so I guess the process of renaturing is the return to relationship, and that's exactly it. That's exactly what we're talking about. When you're able to be adaptable and have all these different senses, the senses are important because they allow relationship, and that's the disconnection is lack of relationship. A regenerative system, there's deep relationship, as opposed to extraction. So the industrial model is extractive, the regenerative model is deep relationship. And beginning to use your senses within those systems allows for the deepening of relationship over time. So yeah, there was a few questions in there. I'm just thinking, what what shifts in a community's health when people grow and save their own nutrient-dense seed?
What shifts in the community health? Well, I think the shifts are all subtle. I don't know that necessarily they are things that happen fast, and obviously I think they're very gentle shifts, but you start reconnecting. I mean, there's a process of reconnecting, and you notice that in so many different ways. It's I think any way that you step back into this process of coevolution or growing your own food, building healthy soil, any step that you take, and some steps are easy to take, easier than others, you just begin to feel better, and it just draws you more and more in. So finding your doorway, finding your pathway. Everyone, I mean, people will have different ways of stepping back into this journey, but the feedback that you get in subtle, quiet ways is very powerful, and it's just re-entering the web of life, strengthening the web of life, building ecosystem health, building human health, building community health. It all just starts to rebuild in the same way that it's fallen apart in very quiet, subtle ways. Often you don't even notice it falling apart. Well, I think sometimes you don't notice it rebuilding, but then you do notice it suddenly. I mean, here we suddenly noticed after 3 or 4 years of planting trees that suddenly we had an insect population again. And another couple of years later, we had this insane bird population, which they weren't even here when we came. So it kind of just happens. I kind of see it like, if you start making choices that are going, if you start making choices that align with the laws of nature, then, like planting trees, simple as planting trees, then the natural world steps in and supports us. Like, you don't have to ask. It's waiting and waiting and waiting. If you stop spraying the weeds and let them flower, then you're allowing the natural world to do its thing, and it will do its thing. It's almost like it's waiting for us to stop trying to destroy it. If you just have to stop trying to destroy the life around you, make a different choice about some things that you do, and the natural world gets right in behind you and supports you. It's so amazing. It's sat there waiting so long for us to learn this lesson, but it's so fast to step in and build the life and support us to do it. And I think, I mean, I've had a few struggles with this, like learning to feel happy with what I used to think was a mess under the fruit trees. I mean, my forest garden doesn't look like a neatly mown forest garden. It looks horrendous to some people. It just looks like a big mess, but it's life. It's full of life. It's really alive, and amazing things are coming out of there. But I've had to change, my thinking around what, how I want to live, and how I want the natural world kind of takes over that. I don't know. It's quite a subtle thing, and just taking the time out every day to notice. to hear, to notice. And I actually think we've got more senses than what we've got names to. Amber was talking previously about our senses and our connection with our senses and the world around us. One of the things that I've been feeling is that for quite a few years now is that we've got parts of us we don't even have words for. That when you start reconnecting with all these things, you start becoming a different person and opening up to things you didn't even have that potential before. So I don't know where the end result of this is, but I just have a feeling that the potential for humans to be incredibly amazing, peaceful, powerful people, sovereign beings, the potential is huge, and it's just requires simple steps to make some different choices about how we do things.
Yeah, I think for me the question of seeding, can be literally an act of putting a seed in the ground, but it can also be, metaphorical seeding a conversation or seeding a relationship or, taking that step. I'm here in Perth in Western Australia, which they, proudly refer to as the most remote capital city in the world. Like there's it's Perth. I'm not sure anybody knows where Western Australia is, but it's not close to most places. It's kind of hard to get to. It's like the end of the line. Um, but there's this amazing gathering happening here, a series of gatherings happening this whole week. Um, there's conferences and gatherings and the governor is coming in giving the opening blessing, in about, I don't know, 6 hours from now or something, at this gathering. And I was just having, talking to one of the founders of this whole organization a couple nights ago, and he's a farmer, and he started messing around with some things, some inoculants and some biostimulants, and started, sharing with his neighbors, hey, try this out a little bit, and no pressure, just sort of seeding the conversation and getting that process going. And this is 20, 30 years ago. And now there's this whole burgeoning movement and conversation and process and culture and community coalescing around all this stuff. And, I think we have massive power. It may be more comfortable or more, easy to pull back to go to, find your private spot and not engage, but the act of, you know, reaching out and connecting and engaging in symbiosis that's the model of nature, right? The model of nature is symbiosis, is everything is webbed together.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of what indigenous, traditional, cultural, dynamics involved was people doing things together, music and meals and, whatever it all was on the land. What do they say? They work 2 or 3 hours a day, right? And when the anthropologists study these indigenous cultures, they're like, they don't do hardly anything except for hang out. And somehow they're optimizing ecosystem function, and they have deep spiritual traditions, and they don't have chronic disease, and all this kind of stuff is happening. But I think it becomes more and more easy with screens and private property and boundaries and jobs and everything else to sort of isolate yourself from those um, experiences of life. And I'm almost 50, and I feel like I'm starting to really appreciate that. I mean, I had a bunch of people come out to my farm from Boston a couple weeks ago, just random people. I'd given a workshop out there, and it's like, hey, I got a bunch of vegetables. Anybody want some? I got way more than I can possibly eat. And there's like 15 people out, and I came and they picked and we had lunch, and it was just a deeply fulfilling experience to have people come together on the land and just be. And yeah, there's all kinds of people with all kinds of issues, but that's diversity is who we are. But there's a fulfillment that comes from that, that is subtle, but is powerful. That seeding of connection, and so yeah, which use of the word are we focusing on? Or there's many uses of the word that are all relevant, I think. Yeah.
I feel like when you're beginning that process or deeply embedded in that process of exactly what you just described, Dan, and then when you're in, so going back to like the question I asked before, which was around what does a community get, or what do you even gain on an individual level? I had this funny experience recently where I was at my little girl's school assembly, and they have all the different houses, red house, green house, white house, and it's always a competition. And I remember sitting in the back of the assembly and thinking to myself, nature doesn't work in how there was like this paradigm for quite a long time around how nature competes, but then they realized actually within a forest system there is no competition, there's collaboration, and the trees are all helping each other in the under the soil.
Yeah.
And I think
They called it Darwin. I think it was called Darwin.
yeah,
That the essence of nature is competition. That was
yeah.
the sort of story we got told for a long time. It doesn't actually seem to be true.
No, there's
Yeah.
actually deep collaboration. And I remember sitting in the back of the assembly and thinking, wow, imagine if the schools taught collaboration over competition, so I think not only do you gain these like insights, but you're able to see what doesn't sit right, which helps you to navigate and have discernment within the culture that we live in, which has kind of gone a bit astray. So it really does give you a sense of like, I don't know, it was just an interesting moment of like, wow, this is like whole countries of children are being taught competition over collaboration, or even the concept of abundance. What you just were explaining around how you've got all this food, like it's too much. But when you don't have a garden and you buy only solely from a supermarket, the cost of living, the cost of food has like gone up astronomically since COVID. And it would be so easy to then subconsciously think of food as like a scarcity, like good food is a luxury now, not even something that a lot of people can even afford, like even just natural food from the supermarket. And so we kind of subconsciously get embedded this idea of scarcity and competition,
Yeah.
It's
when
not
you plug.
subconscious. It's actively propagated through the indoctrination system called school, right? I mean, let's imagine we don't have kids in school in the first place. Like, this is my whole point, is as long as we insist on taking our future generations and perverting them through these processes and teaching them the wrong lessons, we should expect our culture to keep going in the wrong direction. We have to look at this deeply and say, my God, like we are going 180 degrees wrong from, nature. Like we're going to be heading straight into a brick wall. Like there's so many pieces of this puzzle that are just like, we just assume school, right? We just assume that we all have to have jobs and all have to have mortgages and like work, have to work for money, like because we assume separation and we assume property rights and we assume, I don't know. It's just like all these things I feel like are part of this. For me, this renaturing conversation is like, what's the order of life? What's the structure of culture? How can we begin to seriously rejigger it?
Yeah. One of the
Plant
most
seed.
beautiful experience, well, memories, I think now really, but I can still hear it and feel it. One of the most powerful experiences, perhaps, of my life was as a 5-year-old standing with my nana at the gate. She lived in a small New Zealand town and she had this incredible garden, which I have never, it was a very powerful memory for me, that garden. And one day she took me out to her gate, and I was so young I didn't even know how I understood this. And she said, "Oh, that lady over there just had a baby. I must take her some, I don't know, maybe a bake or a cake or something. And that old lady down there, just I'm going to take some flowers to her." And something else had happened here, and she was going to take them some, I don't know, some vegetables or whatever, some pickles or some jam. And I just realized that if you've got a garden, you've always got something to give, and it creates all those, that's like, it just connects you with everybody else in the street. And being able to give is the best feeling. Having something to give is the best
Isn't it?
feeling. It's better than receiving often, although potentially they could be the same. But that was a 5-year-old powerful like lesson or memory for me. And I think that says a lot about the way that our lives have changed. My nana was probably, well, this is like a very long time ago. This is 70 years ago. And so 70 years ago, that was the reality of grandparents' lives. But there's very few grandparents in this country now who have that reality, where they've got a garden and so much to give that they can support half their neighborhood in times of need.
And that builds integrity in the culture and the community
Yeah.
because you know your neighbors, because you're in relationship with them, because you have goodwill. That builds the fabric of the culture. That's not the GDP, to reference the first presentation of this conference, about economics and what is the the economy of culture, and is it capital, or is it community and culture and mutual support, and yeah, so much here.
All right, so we've got a little bit of time for questions, but just before we go into the questions, the part four, which I feel like would just be so beautiful to end on, was about the invitation to remember. And I feel like it's a beautiful, like if you're not even sure where to begin, or it's just even just this the seed, planting that seed of like remembering, what are we remembering? And so the impact statement for this last part was, this is not just about gardening, it's about remembering that we are of the earth, that we belong to a lineage of growers, tenders, and seed stewards, and that the vitality of our gardens is tied to the vitality of our children and future generations. When we hold a seed in our hand, we hold generations of care, resilience, and relationship, both botanical and human. To grow a seed is to take your place in that lineage. This is cultural revival. This is regeneration, a return to wholeness with the land, with each other, and with the deep biological rhythm of seed to seed and generation to generation.
Yep. I'm brought back to the fact that I was hoping to at least cover a few more practical skills about the act of seed saving. And I think you gave us the short summation of it, Kay, about, the weight and the size and things like that. But I feel like we've had a wonderfully rollicking, beautiful philosophical conversation, but I was sorry to
Yeah,
sort of
no, we
to
can open up, start with that question of like what are the top tips per se to actually, how do you save, what is even heritage seed saving? How do you do that in the best way?
and the selection. I think the selection piece is really key. But I don't think people do. I think people, they take the tomato maybe and they save the seeds and they plant the seeds. They don't know how to discern between which ones to plant, which ones not to plant, because you shouldn't plant all of them.
Well, there's two sides of it. One's the genetics and one's the environment. So in terms of genetics, like it's a constant ongoing dance at every step of the way of selecting. Well, so let's say, so right now we're here and it's springtime here and we're planting our seed gardens. So the first thing that the garden crew will do is we've got mother seed stored, which is the best seed from the year before. So if we're planting large seeds, for example, like corn seed or bean seed, where you can actually see individual seeds, then you always start with more seeds than plants you need, and you look at the seeds and you choose the best seeds. Like big seeds shouldn't have they should have translucent skin, they shouldn't have cracks in them, they shouldn't be dusty. I mean, if you open a bag of seeds and it's all dusty, it means the seeds haven't even got enough density or strength to hold themselves together. They're actually falling apart. Dust is the seed falling apart. Nearly all corn that you buy now in a bag is just literally falling apart before your eyes. It's just full of dust. So you choose the best seeds by look. And this is even after you've done all the other
This is a
work.
whole workshop right here by look. Like, we need to go to your place and get a camera and get you and have you explain to us what you've learned about how
I
look.
spent 5 years filming a seed saving masterclass with all of this in it, and we're in the process of editing it now. So there's going to
Brilliant.
be a really comprehensive, probably the only one in the
That's
world, I think,
awesome.
comprehensive seed saving masterclass covering almost every seed line.
Thank you.
But yeah, so then you start with that, and then you plant your seedlings in compost in something biologically active and nourishing, and then you plant them in such a way that they're basically quite closely together, and you prick out the first ones that come up, which are the strongest seed. So the largest, heaviest seed, it means it's got more carbon in it and it attracts more water faster, and they germinate faster. So those are the ones you want to be pricking out to grow on. So then you still prick out more than you need. And then when they get to the point where they're at the transplanting stage, you transplant the strongest looking seedlings. And then from there, you watch your bed of seedlings carefully, and so we've got to be careful at some point that we're not doing what the industrial breeders do, and we're just like only selecting, like we're,
For
because
production.
every season is different, and some seeds might do better in one season than another season in different conditions, and we don't want to be narrowing the selection or the diversity, the genetic diversity in the plants or in the seed line too much. So we have to be careful about which plants we rogue out. If they're super weak and they're never going to do really well, then maybe you pull them out during the growing process. But you've got to think carefully about what are you selecting for. And I would never pull out something that was a slightly different color, or maybe a slightly different shape, or slightly longer to mature, because all of those could be strengths in another season. So there's a fine line between roguing for a strong seed line and maintaining genetic diversity. And I think a lot of that comes with just experience and getting to know a crop. Like, I mean, we've got, I think, 800 seed lines here, and I pretty much know the stories of all of them, and I know what they're like and what they taste like and how they grow. So it's easy enough for me to make those decisions. But I think for anyone else, it just takes some time and some years of working with things. So then you end up with, at the end of the season, you've potentially done some roguing, pulled out some weak ones, or some that have, sometimes things cross and you don't want them to with something different, and you don't want that to happen. You might have to pull them out or not, depending on what you're heading for. And then, so then you end up with all these seeds, and you've got to then take them to the seed shed. And one of the most beautiful things that I learned, I had a seed saving scholarship years ago to go to America, and I spent time with the crew on the ground at the Seeds of Change farm in Gila.
Iowa. Yeah.
Rich Pecoraro, he's an amazing gardener. And he showed me, so what they were doing was that it's like desert there. And he showed me, so they just put a tarp on the ground when they harvest all their big seed crop, throw it all onto the tarp and get the drums out and dance the stories into the seeds, so that the seeds hold the stories, the whole whakapapa, the whole storyline, the whole history of that seed line is danced into the seeds every year. So that feels like such a powerful thing to do. But then once you've got your seeds, then we put them through screens. We want the biggest ones for the mother seed, and then we want the heaviest, biggest ones. So those are the seeds that are going to absorb the most moisture the fastest the next spring, because they've got the most carbon grown into them, and they're going to be the best ones for the next year's crop. So we usually actually, when we put the seed through the screens, we usually throw away the smallest seed. Often this, if you keep your weakest, smallest seed in with all the other seeds, it's going to affect the germination rate of the whole crop. And you want the highest germination rate for everybody, not just for the mother seed. So if you want to be selling really high quality seed, you've got to throw away some of the seed every year. some seed lines it's more than others. Sometimes you don't have to throw much away at all, and you've got an even seed line. It's very easy to see how even the seed line is when you winnow it. We sometimes winnow it out in the air and in a breeze, but you can't always guarantee to get the right wind speed when you're trying to do that. So we use fans a lot. And when you're winnowing seed onto a sheet, you can see exactly which are the heaviest and which are the lightest. The lightest ones sometimes blow right away.
Take
And the
off,
heavy
yeah.
ones just drop straight down. And so you get a lot of visuals around the variability in the seed, and you want to end up with an even seed line. Take the best off from mother seed and then create an even seed line for what you want to sell. And so every step along the way, there's just always something you can do to be watching and choosing how you want to. So this is the magic thing about it, is that seed lines don't stay the same. They never did. Like seed lines always change every single time they get grown out. And that's about the relationship, the seed's relationship with the earth and the universe and us. So we choose the ones that are going to work best for us in our environment over generations. And every year there's going to be slight changes in those seeds. And I've seen that in New Zealand, in Northland. When I lived in Northland, there are lots of major valley systems in Northland. And when peaches first came into this land with the very early ship captains and the missionaries that were traveling around, the ship captains in the 1830s and 40s, they arrived. Well, actually, the peaches got here in the late 1700s. And they traveled around Northland, and then they sort of stayed in the valleys where they were. And when I went traveling around those valleys, like 100 and something years later, 150 years later, every valley had its own slight variation of this original white peach. And the same thing happens with, so it's happened with even the fruit trees, that happens, but with the vegetable seeds, it obviously happens much faster. So the seeds adapt to your own soils and your own climate conditions and your own, I don't know, the things in the universe that affect us and the planets, and they adapt, and they slowly adapt. And even though it might be the same cultivar with the same name, the one grown in your soil is the best one for you. And I've heard stories from lots of people in New Zealand who live in marginal places for growing food. And so they've started off with the best seed they can get, and they save their own. And within, I'd say, 10 to 15 years, you've all pretty much got, you really need to rename it, because you've pretty
It's
much
a new
got a
variety.
seed
Yeah.
line, even though it might have the same name. So it's a constant process of evolution, and nothing ever stays the same. It's the dance of life. One thing changes and everything changes, and all the relationships change, but it's quite subtle. So seed saving is simply about entering that dance of life, really, as far as I'm concerned, and noticing what's happening around us. And something happens here, so we make a move there, and something there, and the same thing with the actual building the soil, because the relationship between, I think the thing that I love the most, that even all children can get. I did it. One of the online workshops that we've got is called Growing Great Seedlings. And when you plant, it's very clear that when you plant a seed into living soil, you can pull a seedling up in 2 or 3 days, and you can see the living bridge between the plant roots and the soil. And that only happens in living soil. So you can see that you've got life, and you've got a connection between the plant roots and the soil. And that is the beginning of the whole thing. And it's so obvious, and it's so visual. And when you buy seedlings in a supermarket or the garden centres in this land, there's dead soil that they're planted in, and we pull the seedlings up, and there's no connection between the plant roots and the soil. It's just holding them up, and they're being mainlined with soluble fertilizer. So I think that's a real point at which you can see, wow, we can do this, living soil. You've connected your plants, your seeds to the life in the soil. And then you've got to, you have to do the same thing in the garden, and da da da. So I think it's such a satisfying thing to do, and children love it.
Nice. Beautiful. We've got a number of questions here, and we've only got 20 minutes left in our scheduled time. So I'm gonna try to run through these and see if we can get everybody's questions addressed. Those who haven't yet, the Q&A box is a place, I should have said it earlier, to put your questions. Most people have been trained now over the past couple of weeks that we spent the last half hour on questions. I've got Jane here first. She says, "Hi, Amber Rose. What's the name of the documentary about the Kogi in Colombia?"
It's called Aluna, Aluna. It should just be on YouTube. I think it was last time I looked.
Brilliant.
There are two
Okay.
of them now. There's another one that was done, that was filmed by the BBC, and they went back 30 years later and did another one, and they're both incredible.
Awesome. Thank you for that resource. That's brilliant. Emma asks, "What's happening in New Zealand with GMO seeds? Is there a lot of resistance among farmers, or are you sliding towards their being normalized?"
Oh God. Oh. I've been so, I think we're sliding towards it being normalized. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. The whole thing with genetic engineering, sort of, yeah, probably the same as other countries, reared its ugly head, 20 odd years ago, and I was really involved then. And we actually walked to Parliament from the top of New Zealand right down to Wellington to, it was a really big thing. But it's been so hard keeping these seeds alive for the future that I've had to totally focus on that and trust that other people are going to deal with the whole GE thing. And I'm sure there are lots of people doing a lot of things, and I really hope it doesn't just become normalized, but it's not feeling that hopeful.
There
As
are
of yet,
there are a lot of people putting up massive resistance, though. There's Organics New Zealand doing an incredible job, but yeah, there's also a big push to get it normalized. So will be interesting to see what happens because there's a lot of push on both sides.
That's good.
as of yet, they're not allowed.
No.
You've still been able to maintain the boundary, so genetically modified seeds are not allowed in New Zealand. There's a few places on the planet where they're still not, but yes, as we know, the system pushes and pushes and pushes to break down the walls. So yeah, good good luck in that process.
Well, I think we've probably got one of the most strongest clean corn collections in the world. We've got an amazing corn collection here.
Yeah. Gaitu Kia says, Gatu Kia, very interesting and amazing. What do we distort when we graft fruits in relationship to this discussion?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the same thing. We grow our stone fruit here from seed because the old trees are genetically stable and they grow true. Some very slight, you do get shifts and changes, and sometimes you get sports, but if we graft as little as possible, but the thing, there are some advantages as well to grafting. And so if you grow up, say, in a village where you've got lots of wild lambs and lots of diversity and lots of old trees around, you might not need grafted fruit trees to ensure that your children have got food now, because there might be lots of trees out there already with all the food. But if you, for example, with an apple tree, if you want to feed your kids apples now, then you've got to have a fruit tree that is grafted, essentially, or budded, because if you don't know how long it's going to be before it fruits, and you don't know what the fruit's going to ever be like. It might not even be edible, and it might take 15 years before it starts fruiting. So food security is pretty important as well. So we're in a situation now where even in home gardens, there are some things I would plant as grafted trees because I really want that kind of an apple. So I think it does have there are some positive. Grafting's an ancient skill. Our ancestors have been grafting trees for a really long time. But we also grow a lot of things from seed, a lot of things from cutting, and I think there are pros and cons. Yeah.
One thing I like to bring up. Sorry.
Obviously, what's happened all around the Western world is that, well, in New Zealand, I'm pretty sure it's the same everywhere, is after the Second World War, we all wanted a higher standard of living. And so we all the women especially went to work, and we gave away gardening. We didn't garden anymore. And so someone else, and New Zealand wanted to, in order to pay for the automatic washing machines and the, 2 cars and the 3-bedroom houses and quarter-acre pavlova paradises, we all went to work, and so the government then had to earn a lot more overseas dollars to pay for all the automatic washing machines and cars and everything coming into the country. So the result of that was that we gave away, the government invested all the money in breeding what we could sell overseas. So the most important thing was shelf life. So we ended up with all this fruit that was bred to earn New Zealand export dollars, and that becomes the only fruit trees that the growers can grow if they want to earn money. If they've got to export it to earn a living. And so they become the only trees the nurserymen can grow if they want to earn a living. And that becomes the only fruit we can get in the supermarket because we get the second grade fruit. So that completely changed the way we choose our trees and food. And we just have to learn to do it ourselves. And you don't have to have everything grafted all the same.
One thing I like to talk about in this conversation is it's one thing to graft, it's another thing to put the seed in the ground of a tree, dig it up, graft it, plant it here, dig it up again, transplant it again. I'm pretty sure trees don't like to be dug up and transplanted. And so, what do we lose when we transplant trees? It's one thing to, plant a seed in the ground and then graft it versus that whole process that, when you buy a seedling, it's a sapling of a tree. It's gone through a couple traumatic experiences, which I'm gonna
I
guess
don't
are
think it has to be. I prefer to have a tree grown in open ground and mark the north side of, like, always
yes,
mark the way the tree's growing in the ground, because the tree roots align with the magnetic earth.
yes,
And so we put dots on our trees before we dig them up, so that the next person who buys them can plant them facing in the same direction. That's the biggest
yeah.
issue. And then also, if you wrench them carefully, every time you cut a root, it grows a whole lot more roots. And so potentially, if you look after that tree well and plant it well, and it's been wrenched properly and it's planted in the same direction, you can have a wonderful, beautiful, powerful tree. But when they've been grown in pots, I think it's more difficult, because you don't know where the north was. The roots go round and round.
Yeah.
It's I think aligning the roots with the magnetic north is really important.
Also, and it applies to annuals as well, not just perennials. Um, but yeah, that's the whole conversation there. Okay, I'm going to move on because people are putting in more questions and the time
Good.
is
I love
shortening.
questions.
Yeah. Ben asks, what is your trusted resource for saving your own seed if we back up to the choice of industrial seed versus heritage seed and then head back down the heritage seed path? Can we feed nourishing is assumed by choosing better seeds that are matched to the home soil? Everyone? This choice of seed is a small choice that heads to big cultural change. I think the central question is, what's your trusted resource for saving your own seed? And I think you said you've recorded a multi-series course
Yeah,
that everyone else should
we're just
probably
trying to
get.
find the funding at the moment to edit it. I spent 5 years filming that with
Yeah,
a filmmaker, and it feels really important. We've got a booklet, but there are quite a few booklets around the world, books on seed saving. Yeah, no, we're just aiming to have this online
yeah.
workshop edited in the next few months.
Any of the books that are out there that you would recommend over others, or you would say this person did a pretty
Well,
good job?
The problem with the books, I mean, I originally my Bible was Suzanne Ashworth's book, Seed to Seed,
Seed to seed,
but
yeah.
I soon realized that after I built some confidence up, I realized that nearly all the books on seed saving, there are a few that have come out of America, um, you have to write what is true for everybody in there if you're giving instructions. So, for example, you have to write, if it's a brassica, that say you're trying to grow cabbages or broccoli or Brassica oleracea, then they can be pollinated by bees and other insects. So theoretically, you have to plant them bee distance apart. Well, that is quite a long way. And I've learned from experience, but you have to say that, because if you say anything else, someone's going to go, well, it doesn't work for me. But because what I've learned is that you can grow them much closer than bee distance apart if you've got big trees, if you've got valley systems. Like your own individual system makes a big environment, makes a really big difference to how you do it. But you can't really put that in a book, because if as soon as you put that in a book, someone's going to say, well, you're wrong, because the reality is bees can travel whatever many k's bees can travel. So what I've found is it's a lot more personal, and there's a lot more room for movement than what those books all say. So I've tried to explain that in the small booklet that I've written about seed saving. I think it's called Save Your Own Seeds, which is available in e-booklet form on our website. But I think in the end, it comes down to just follow something to begin with, but build your own experience, because you'll notice I mean, there was an amazing guy in America called, he was called Mushroom by his friends. His name was Alan Capula. I think he
Alan
died
Capular.
recently.
Alan
He
Capular
was
was
a
an absolute
really
amazing being.
amazing seed
Yep.
saver, and he grew everything all in one garden.
Yep.
All the things that crossed, because he was so good at knowing how to do it and what to do. And he was the master. Like, I'm at kindergarten compared to where he was at. So,
He's someone to look up in the conversation, Alan
yeah,
Capular.
he
I think you
was
can find him on
We're
really
in
YouTube.
kindergarten. God help the rest of us.
well, he was a very incredible person. And he grew it all together. So there are lots of ways of doing it, and the books that are available kind of tell you the safest ways. But I think we can move on from there quite a lot as well.
You could, I mean, as I understand it, this idea that you want to have this variety separate from that variety is not traditionally how it was done. What traditionally was done was you would have the landrace, which is, like you said, the genetics of the one that does better in dry versus the one that does better in wet, and the one
Yeah.
that does better in hot versus cold. You want that all mixed up in the genetics. You don't want uniformity, you want diversity. And so then the bees are doing you a service by cross-pollinating,
Yeah,
right?
but
Instead of
it's quite
fighting
an
nature.
interesting thing to think about, because
That's my argument,
I've
but
got a great example of that is that we have some friends in New Zealand, the Lands, who live up in the Hokianga, and they've been saving their own seeds for a really long time now, like several generations. And they made the decision right from the beginning. They realized, you know, they could only grow one oleracea, because they've only got this area of land, and if they grow more, they're going to all cross up. So they bought a packet of cabbage seed, a packet of broccoli seed, a packet of cauliflower seed, a packet of kale seed, planted them all, and just let them cross. And every
yeah.
year they just save what they want from there. But that requires being prepared to change your diet and change your whole food culture. And so, yes, originally we all had the one that was best in our area. We didn't have a broccoli and a cauliflower and a kale. Like, those are things that have mostly developed in Italy and France, and they've become normal in the supermarkets here all around the world. But if you're growing your own food and saving your own seeds, you ain't going to have all those different vegetables on your plate in a week. It's just not the reality. So,
But what you have on your plate might be much more appropriate for you and your body if you're on your land.
yeah,
So the
yes, it
question
will
is,
be,
what's the
but
priority?
it does change the food culture.
That's the whole point. is to evolve and to be present
Yeah.
with where we're at, or one could argue at least that's something to consider. Yeah.
One of the really interesting challenges that I set myself a couple of years ago was I designed a garden that would provide a family with all the year-round food. A lot of it had to be stored, of course, and enough space, and in a way that they could save all their own seeds so that you never had to go back and buy seeds again. And it took an extra 50 square meters, I think, outside the main food garden so that you could save all your own seeds. But it was a really incredible exercise, and it is now a booklet called the Revival Garden. I think that's what it's called. And it's totally possible for people to grow all their own food and save all the seed for that garden without having to continually be going back, like just building, the connections between you and your seed and your land. It's an amazing thing to do.
I think so. We've got something here which has been referenced a number of times, which we would be completely remiss if we didn't say directly. You lead the Kawanga Institute, which has done amazing work. You obviously sell seed, but you also have a number of booklets and courses. And what's the website? What's the content? For those who are at all inspired by you and your work, I think it's bears just a formal explication of what it is that you do and how people can access it. I
I
was certainly
think
was not aware.
Amber's just posted it, I think. That's
Yeah, I
probably our
just posted the
website.
link to that e-booklet.
But that link may not be evident to everyone who's watching this recording 10 years from now. Can you verbally?
Well, you answer it, Amber.
Yeah, so the Kawanga Institute is not only a living seed bank, it is a massive resource of online. There's a big online education platform, and we can give you all the links which you can send out in the follow-up recording. But there's a online education platform which you can find on the Kawanga website with a series of online learn at your own pace courses around everything from garden planning through to growing great seedlings, growing regenerative compost,
Designing a nutrient dense
yeah,
diet.
designing a nutrient dense diet, or even harvesting, because a lot of people will grow, you start to grow this big garden, and then what the heck do you do with everything in fall when you've got a
Traditional
massive influx of food? So it's like how to harvest and prepare your crops, all sorts of things. Then there's also a physical books and booklets and seed saving charts, vegetable selecting charts, and e-versions of those. So if you're overseas, which probably a lot of the people on this call will be, we don't post overseas currently, but there is ebook versions, so you can download the ebook version. And then there's also a big knowledge base, which we're slowly fleshing out with a lunar gardening calendar, different articles on various things like what's on the knowledge base at the moment, like how to grow amazing potatoes, kumara, which are sweet potatoes. Yeah,
Yeah,
different
there's a
articles.
lot of stuff there. One of the
Mm.
things that we are probably doesn't apply to this group, but we are about to our online video, our online workshops are going to have more than one language. We're going to put several languages there, so that's going to make them easier for other Spanish speaking people, etc., to connect up.
Kawanga.org.nz. It's KOANGA dot
Yeah.
org.nz is the place to start. I just want to get that in the verbal recording here because this is not just listened to by people who are present now. It's, you know, this will be on YouTube. Hopefully thousands of people over time will listen to this. And I just want them to be able to track back if they're inspired to the amazing wealth of value that you've been building over these number
The
of
other thing
years.
that started as well is a online garden club. So if you join, there's actually an international subscription garden membership option, and you get a whole bunch of online courses for free as part of your subscription model and ebooks. And Kay and I have started doing monthly live Zoom calls, and each month we go over the lunar gardening calendar to really deeply practically support people with that particular month and what's happening in the garden and the forest garden, to just really support people on a very practical way. So you get to either join those live monthly Zoom calls or watch the recording. And then we've also got 5 conversations throughout the year with different international speakers as well. So yeah, come and join the garden club.
Yeah, no, thank you for the amazing work you're doing. And like I said at the very beginning, I've been looking for almost decades now for somewhere I could direct people to and say, this is where you could get good seed. And I had, the first group organization anywhere on the planet I'm aware of, at least, where I could say, this is where, as I understand it, people are doing a proper job of stewarding and providing that most optimal quality of this most important thing, which is the seed itself. So um, we've come to the end of our time here. Thank you both for this an amazing conversation. Do you have any final comments you'd like to share, or
Oh, sorry, that was my school alarm.
words of wisdom?
For me, I'd just like to say it feels amazing to have finally, after all these years, come to a point where there's other people in the world who are interested in this kind of thing. Like it's been a long time. It's been a
Yeah,
long time holding seeds with an understanding that they're going to become valuable in the future, and it's starting to feel as though they are becoming valued, and we're going to make it.
yeah,
It's a hopeful thing.
yeah. All right, Amber, last word to you.
No, just thank you for being here and weaving conversations and planting seeds, literally and metaphorically. Yeah, it's beautiful to be able to share the wisdom, join the conversation, and yeah, grow together.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to next week.